Guys, thank you for coming. My name's Kevin Walsh. I lead the sports and entertainment program for Merrill Lynch. We have about 600 advisors across the country who advise athletes and entertainers and people in the industry about their business and about their lives. And we train them. We continue to educate them over time about topics that are important to people in the sports and entertainment industry. And we're so happy that all of you came today. And I think you're going to enjoy the presentation that we have. One quick plug before we get started. We do have the sports and entertainment group. As I mentioned, those are financial advisors across the country. We also have both commercial and retail banking. So we have checking accounts and everything from that to loans. We also do investment banking, where we advise people on select opportunities around buying, selling, and operating teams and stadiums. So I just wanted to get that out there before we get started. We happen to have on the stage today one of our great sports and entertainment advisors, and that is Frank Duracco. I'm going to lateral over to Frank so that Frank can introduce himself, and we'll go from there. Frank.
Thank you very much. I'm part of a sports and entertainment and international team based in Miami. We're basically about 30% US-based clientele, 70% international. I joined the firm in 1981, so I've been with the firm for a long, long time. And our specialization is structuring, wealth planning, and asset management. I'm personally a senior portfolio manager, and I do more of the investing side of the work in our team.
Great. And now Michael is one of our tax experts at the firm. Michael, do you want to talk about your background and introduce yourself?
Well, I've been working with sports figures and entertainers for over 30 years. I'm a tax nerd. My job is to make sure that they stay compliant, that they understand all the opportunities that are available for them to reduce their tax exposure. We also do quite a bit of work around their philanthropy, their charitable interests, and we also do quite a bit of work. Once an athlete starts to acquire assets, we do a lot of work around asset protection to make sure that those assets stay their assets.
And last but not least, we have Jeff Cameron, who probably needs no introduction to many of you in the crowd. But Jeff, would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Jeff Cameron.
I think that's for you, by the way.
Yeah.
I choose to.
I just retired, about a season ago, and it's been a great run. And now I'm transitioning to my next part of my career and building a business. So hence I'm with these three amazing guys. So
thank you. Thanks, Jeff. So I'm going to start with you. Can you talk a little bit about your early experience, your early life around finances and what it felt like to begin to make money? Give us a little bit of a sense of where you started and where you got to at the beginning of your career.
Yeah, I'm from Attleboro, Mass, from a working class family where my mom and my dad, construction and in the medical field, nursing. And they're a typical family that just supported my two sisters and myself, and but they didn't come from a financial wealth of, a legacy essentially, or they weren't savvy, and they just took care of us. And my first jump into the professional of my first year at Houston Dynamo was I made $32,000 my first year as a professional, and you're supposed to be looked at as this athlete that brings in all this money, but I was only just covering my rent and trying to do extra appearances so I could have some extra money in my pocket. And it just kept me on the grind like my mom and my dad did, and taught me how to have that hard work and that mentality. And then that season kind of went by, a rookie year, and all of a sudden I've earned this chunk of bonus money, and my first real financial smart move was to pay off my student debt and the loans that my parents took out for me to go to college my first couple of years. So that's my first financial move that allowed me to be successful in making the right steps for my future now.
Great. Frank, if we can talk to you from, you just heard Jeff explain kind of what his background was. If someone with that background were to come into your office, what kind of advice would you give them? How would you run them through the process your team does?
Well, obviously every client is different, and you know, this segment of the clientele, sports and entertainment, we deal with a different circumstance as far as how the money comes in. So one of the things that we do is manage risk, and timing risk is an important risk. So most people save all their lives, and then when they're 65, they retire. If they're a CEO, they might get a bonus at the end, or they might cash in their 401k or sell their business. In this case, the money is up front. So it skews a little bit the standard practice, because the younger the person, the more the risk. But we have this timing risk, which causes us not to have funds coming in the future, and we have to invest everything at one time, and if the timing is wrong, we're assuming a great amount of risk. And there's an example I always use for clients, which is an extreme example, but if you look at the NASDAQ index, which is technology from 2000 to 2014, 14 years, if you put $1.4 million at the beginning, after 14 years you had $1.4 million, and in between you were down over 50%. If you invested the same amount over the 14 years, you would have $2.6 million. So there's a huge disparity in what the returns look like based on how the money comes in. So the first advice is, you're not the standard type of investor. You have this additional dimension to you that we need to take care of. So we need to skew on the side of conservative, even though the person might be young and it's bringing in a lot of money.
Great. Michael, you've actually literally written a white paper around the issues that face early career athletes, mid-career athletes, and late career athletes. What did you hear in Jeff's story that you might also comment on?
Well, I compliment Jeff on taking his excess capital and retiring a debt, right? So I know young players, they'd rather take that excess capital and go out and buy a fat car or a big house, and that can often put them into further debt, right? And so it's kind of layering additional problems on them. So first thing I do when I'm with a client is say, okay, you're now starting to acquire capital, you're a young person, you probably don't know anything about taxes, income taxes, and estate planning. And so at a bare minimum, you need to have a last will and testament or revocable trust, because if the bus hits you tomorrow, the assets that you are acquiring now need to somehow pass to your wife or your kids in the way that you want them to. The other thing that these younger players maybe have never filed a tax return before, and now they're playing in a dozen states, so they have that state income tax, they have federal income tax, they go over the pond, and now they've got international tax. And all of this, if you fail in that compliance, can create unbearable penalties and interest that you'll never dig yourself out of. And if a player's worrying about taxes and that's crushing them in their personal life, they probably don't have their head in the game on the field. So I just think that if they start off fresh and clean and they kind of have the right guidance, that relieves their headspace to go out and kill it, on the pitch.
Yep, that's great. All right, so Jeff, let's come back to you. So let's talk a little bit about your mid-career and the things you did right and the things you maybe didn't do so right, and what advice would you have for your younger self looking back on it now?
If I was going back to my first year, you have to think about where that athlete is. Most players live in the moment, and you don't want to be distracted, and you're not thinking about their future. You're thinking about this year and performing for this season. And it's developing a trust and a support system around you, and to help you advise to make the right decisions. And it's okay to be uncomfortable, to ask. I'm not supposed to know like the expertise of financial, systems and the ins and outs of everything, but it's okay to ask and be advised and really take ownership of your future and who you are, and invest in yourself as a player and as a person, because our careers are finite. It could be a year, it could be, close to 20 years like myself, and I was fortunate enough, but I've also seen players that, they come into the professional ranks and then a year later they got injured or they're out. And are they making the right decisions? Have they built a team around them to support them and on their, afterlife? So for me, it's being aware and really taking ownership.
Now, you mentioned as we were going through this that there was a specific issue with a contract that came up. Do you want to share that story?
It was an incredible moment in my career, because it was that point in time where I was transitioning over to England, and at this time I had an agent that was probably not had my best interest in me, and nonchalantly he was like, "Jeff, we need a new player contract rep." And over in the UK, you need, at that moment, an updated contract with your agent so the club can submit it to the Premier League and go through there. And without me thinking, I just naturally just signed it without having the thought like, hey, I should have my lawyer look over it, or I trusted this person. And at the end of the day, it was, and added another 5% on the fees that he would get. And fortunate enough, I then stumbled on to my agent, Gary Miller, who's here, who looked out for me, and he was working on behalf of my club in Stoke. And he got me out of a situation where, in that moment, I was just thinking of, I just want to get over there. I just want to play. And not doing my due diligence and going through the contract and making the conscious effort of, hey, letting my team around me to really look it over. That's there to protect me. So.
Yeah, that's great. Michael, talk a little bit about the dynamics that are created when an athlete is moving from one country to another, and the kinds of planning that they would need to go into.
Yeah, so, well, first is income tax issues, right? So when a player comes over to the U.S. temporarily, and they play in the U.S., they'll have U.S. source income. And so they're going to have to report that. Now, depending upon which country is their home country, the United States may have a bilateral tax treaty with them. So, for example, UK, those treaties are meant to try to prevent double taxation. So that player would either get a credit on his U.S. income tax return or his UK income tax return. So there's not a double tax to be paid. But the point is that there needs to be the right filings in the U.S. There's also an issue with when you come over to the U.S. temporarily and you start to hold property here. You buy a house, you have cars, you have art and collectibles, you have property. And if something were to happen to that player and they were to pass away, everything above $60,000 would be hit with a 40% estate tax for a non-U.S. person. It's pretty severe. Only $60,000 is exempt from estate tax. So there are ways to hold property in the U.S. which would, through offshore LLCs, for example, that would take a U.S. home and make it a non-U.S. situs asset. So doing the right planning. And then for people that are coming into the U.S. that intend to stay in the U.S., to immigrate to the U.S., there's all kinds of pre-immigration planning to be done. Most of that planning involves trying to step up tax basis of different assets before you come into the U.S. So by the time you come into the U.S., if you wanted to sell something, there'd be no U.S. income tax liability whatsoever. Part of that planning also has to do with doing asset protection planning, bringing assets from offshore into the U.S. and placing them inside of a trust structure, for example, so that if you get into that car accident and you're held liable, they may be able to go after your personal assets, but they can't go after anything that you've tucked away inside a trust.
And Frank, so I thought that Jeff made such an interesting point about athletes living in the moment, and that can be an impediment to them planning for the long term. So can you talk a little bit about how do you plan for your clients in the long term? What's your process there?
Specifically for athletes, I think it's important to start with the end and work backwards. So you look at points in time, 40 years of age or 60 years of age, and then you determine what lifestyle you want. And there you have to have a minimum, a desirable, and a ultimate goal. So based on what you talked about a little bit, I would say somebody that is savvy, that can go into business as you are and all that, you can do through financial assets the minimum, and that frees up capital to do the business and so on, which then takes you to either the desired goal or the ultimate goal. Now, each level is going to have a probability of being accomplished, and obviously the minimum, you want a high probability, you want to be all close to 100%. And then maybe 70, 75% for the acceptable or what you like to have, and then maybe 50, 40% for the ultimate. And so when we build the investments, we build them around these probabilities based on history, market assumptions, what Merrill Lynch Research thinks of the future on certain assets, and so on. And so we work backwards. It's not like what's hot today, is it AI or is it Bitcoin? I could care less about that. I just really have to start with the last number and work myself down. So I think it's a process, and it takes a while to do that. And it's kind of shocking because people want to talk investments, right? What's a good stock? Is it Apple or is it Amazon? That's not the point. The point is, what do you want, and how do we make sure that you get at least the minimum, and we have a decent chance of accomplishing what you want to do?
Yeah, okay, great. Somebody handed me this remote. I'm not sure what it's going to do, but I'm going to press play and see if maybe it doesn't do anything. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. There it is. Okay, Jeff. As we prepared for this, you told some stories about things that teams that you had played on did well in preparing you, and you had some stories about things they didn't do so well. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what teams and/or leagues could do to help their athletes?
Yeah, I think when I made my first jump over and to Stoke, and I mean, it's a Premier League club, and they just kind of put everything at the table, and they say, hey, there's your banking, you can choose whatever bank you want. Here we have this person, a liaison, to sort out your housing, and pretty much everything you can ask for, because all they care about is you performing on the pitch. So they want to make sure that you're comfortable and make you feel that you're happy and you're adjusted, and that you're not worrying about things on and off the field, and that's distracting you from performing. So my transition back to the States, and what I see still happening, is these young kids that are in academy systems that sign homegrown and they're on their first team, and are they having a system set up for them? Do they have the right resources to provide them with guidance so their career is long and they have a long career, and that it's not just, the hardest thing is maintaining at a high level. And once you're there, it's to stay there and not be that 1 year and then you're done and you're trying to figure out what's your next move. So having the preparation and the club to have a support system, whether it's financials or real estate or a lawyer, that they have a team there that you can choose from that best suits you and that you can relate to, but also the education side of them teaching you, and it might be with the parent, educating the parents as well, because it might be the same situation that my parents don't come from the best financial system, but they did what's best for me. And if someone were to come in at an earlier age and said, hey, we can help educate your parents and help educate you, you don't repeat the same cycle over. And then you start preparing yourself for the future. And this is what I think can really, really help younger players and even older players as well when they're transitioning.
Yeah. So Frank, keying off of that, what advice would you have for somebody who is trying to find a financial advisor and looking for somebody that they can trust and somebody that they have some chemistry with? How do you do that?
That obviously is very dependent on character and the person and so on, but I tell people to approach it like going to the grocery store and make your list, and what's on the list is what's important to you. Having done this for decades. I would tell you that transparency would be top of my list. How the advisor charges. If there are a lot of hidden fees and commissions, I'd be concerned. I like, that's just my preference, a flat fee model where a fee is negotiated and there's no preference for investment A or B because the advisor is not getting paid. It's just charging. So it's all the numbers are known. The next thing is obviously somebody that has the time to devote to this because there's a front-loaded process, especially when, as I mentioned, you got to work your way backwards and create a plan. It's a lot of work up front, and a lot of advisors, might try to rush through that because it's kind of a lost leader. We don't get paid by the hour like an attorney, but I think that's important to find the person that's willing to put in the time to talk about all the probabilities. And then ask the advisor, so how do you work going forward? Do we have quarterly reviews? Is it every 6 months? Are you going to call me every time there's some news on the market? Can I bounce ideas off of you? Or are you in charge and you don't want to hear what I have to say? And that really boils down to chemistry. There are some people that like to be involved, some people that don't. I have clients that say, give me the magic number at the end of the year and let's go have lunch. And that's one approach, and that's fine. I wouldn't run my money that way, but I have clients that do that. Others are, they'll see something in the news and they'll say, what's the portfolio worth today? So I think chemistry would be important. So I would actually take the time to write down what I would want and then go shopping.
Michael, as I said, you've literally written the book on this. Kind of what advice would you have for a athlete kind of in mid-career, or what other things would you add to what we've talked about here?
From putting together the right professional team. So younger players tend to not know any professionals, right? They may know their agent. They probably maybe know an attorney, but they don't have an accountant yet. They don't have somebody who's an expert in trust and estates. They don't have somebody that knows international tax law. And so they usually have a posse of friends that they rely upon, maybe other players, and that type of advice is about as good as what you paid for it, right? It can be pretty poor at times. So kind of accepting the fact that you really need to reach out to people that kind of do this professionally, people that you like, that you can get, that you want to sit down and have lunch with is very, very important. But getting the right team in place. So I just give you a quick example. I had a player, a baseball player, had a friend of his, another player, convince him to buy about $1 million of crypto last year. That crypto doesn't even exist anymore. That coin is gone. I don't think if he had gone to us, our advice would be to put it into some, unknown crypto coin that had just launched. But a couple of the teammates had done it. Everybody said it was going to be the next Bitcoin. They were going to make $1 gazillion. And 3 players each lost $1 million very, very quickly. So talking to your buddies probably isn't great advice on doing kind of the harder work. Yeah.
Jeff, let's turn to the future a little bit for you. You talked while we were preparing about the next chapter and this project that you're working on called The Ground, which I think is really exciting and really has an opportunity to take off. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what your vision for it is and what you hope it'll be in the future?
Yeah, my business partner, Breck Shea, obviously national team player and teammate at Stoke. And basically, The Ground it will be a soccer-specific training facility that offers rehab, football-specific training to nutrition, everything you can possibly imagine that you're walking into a professional club, you're going to get at The Ground. One is because we've experienced being over in Europe and traveling all around the world. These players are exposed, and people are exposed at a young age of what it takes to be a professional. And to get that 1% to be better than the other person that's doing the right things is really, really important. And that can make or break your career. If I know this person's over here just as good as me, but I'm doing all the right things, I'm looking after my nutrition, I'm doing the recovery, I'm doing everything properly, there's no doubt in your mind that you're going to get to the next level. And the ground wants to offer that. It's a holistic approach of 360 degrees from head to toe, but it's also the lifestyle approach as well, on and off the field, building a team around you, that education, advising, that we can go, hey, you need an agent, there's 4 or 5 agents that we have contacts, and you can choose what best fits. Financial advisors, we have them. You can choose what best fits. And that's the whole approach of what we think and what we've experienced, and we're putting our knowledge and all our hard work in the last 20 years and our grind of what can we do to help the younger generation be more successful and bridge that gap from Europe to the U.S.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, I really think that's a huge opportunity for you guys. I'm so glad that's happening. Frank, let's change the topic a little bit. Given the current market environment, what do you see as medium and long-term planning opportunities out there?
Well, we're at a very difficult point psychologically because we think the interest rate cycle is topping, but investors are, with short-term money, paying anywhere between 5 and 6%. I tell people it's like we're all at a disco and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, the alcohol is flowing and the music is blaring, and we're all happy here, but when the Federal Reserve starts lowering rates, somebody's going to sound the fire alarm and we're all going to head for the same exit. So we're telling people to start locking in rates 5 years or longer. We usually do a ladder, so we'll have a 1-year maturity, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and so on. And the pushback I get is, well, I get less when I put my money 5 years than when I have it in 6 months. And I said, yeah, but the party is going to finish. And when that does, next time that short-term money rolls over is going to be lower and lower and lower. Now, if the person has liquidity needs and they have a preference to have short-term money, we say it doesn't matter. Put it to work long-term. Short-term, we can lend it back to you. And as the rates drop, the loan rates are going to drop. If you want to buy your house and you wanted to buy it cash, maybe look at do a mortgage, and when rates drop, refinance it at a lower rate. So this doesn't happen very often. It's what we call an inverted yield curve. And it's a very difficult time for people that don't understand what to do, because it's easy enough to get a high rate of return on your money with short-term investments. Honestly, the last time this happened seriously is when I started in '81. We were paying 20% on short-term money, and long-term bonds were paying 14%. And then that short-term money went all the way to 0, and whoever locked up 14 was very happy. So, that's what I see now as the challenge, trying to get people to think what's going to happen 24, 25, and beyond.
Yeah. And last question for Michael. What can you talk about considerations for retired athletes? What things should they be keeping in mind?
Well, it depends upon their success, right? So one thing I did want to get out for anybody who's retired or still working that has a bigger balance sheet, right? There's a really interesting provision in our tax code that's it's going to expire in 2 years. So you've got 2 years to get your act together. So I'm talking about any individual that has more than $6.5 million on their balance sheet of anything: toys, cars, boats, stocks, and bonds. If you're married, if you've married and you have more than 13, there's an estate planning move that if you don't do it in the next 2 years could cost your kids about $2.5 million per parent. I'll just leave you with that. Tease you with that.
Okay, good. Everybody, thank you for having us. We're happy that you stuck around for this. I want to thank Jeff Cameron. I want to thank Frank Duraco, and I want to thank my friend Michael Duffy for being here with us this afternoon. Thanks, everybody.